You're working at NASA right now, but to get there, you probably had to develop certain habits as a student, and certain ways of working. So we're wondering, like, what are some effective habits that are really important for students and kids to keep in mind that, as they're, looking to stay focused on goals that they have?
Mm-hmm. So, for me, I took a very winding path to get to where I was, even though I kind of knew what I wanted to do ever since I was a little kid, but I just didn't have a direct way to get from point A to point B. So, and I think that's okay. I think sometimes having those additional life experiences make things a little bit sweeter once you get to where you want to be at the end of the day. But I think habits that are really important for students who are trying to make their way into any sort of goal. I think the first thing is your reason, your why. Why are you doing this? Are you doing this because your mom and dad said you have to go to college? Are you doing this because you have a passion for it? Are you doing this because you want to make money? Whatever your reason is, I think that's important. You got to keep your eye on the ball. And that to me is something that if you don't know the why, then eventually you're going to burn out. And then you're going to sit there and look around and go, what am I doing? So I think that is important. And I think there's a lot to be said for being able to communicate effectively with people, and to be knowledgeable within that communication. So what I mean by that is, I think a habit that everybody, not just people working towards goals, but everybody should have a habit of reading something every day, and not social media, not your Twitter feed, reading something that is something that's either going to bring knowledge into your life or bring situational awareness into what's going on in the world around you, or maybe help you change some habits, or even if it's just complete work of fiction that allows you to just work those skills into it. Because I've seen a lot of kids struggle with reading, and that turns into struggling with writing, which turns into struggling with communication. And a lot of times you only get one shot to communicate things effectively. I'll give you an example. This morning, I was at the space vehicle mock-up facility, and I was training one of our newer astronauts. And we had a change in a procedure since the last time he had seen it. And he's one of these guys, he's exceptionally smart. And he's very quick. I mean, you got him, and then he's going all over the place. And he had a question for me. And I knew that I was probably going to get his attention span for about 30 seconds. And if I didn't communicate it clearly, concisely, and effectively in those 30 seconds, that I was going to lose him, and he was going to either walk away with, well, I don't have any new information and she doesn't know what she's talking about, or he was going to walk away with, oh, okay, she answered my question. Now I understand, moving forward. So I think the habit of reading something really cultivates your ability to forwardly communicate. So that would be my advice to folks out there is get off your phone, get off your gaming device, get off of social media, and really go read something that is something that's going to bring some sort of benefit into your life, and no drama. We don't need all that. So that's personally what I think students should do is you've got to be able to communicate, and you've got to be able to present yourself. And I think it starts when you're young and you read.
That's excellent advice. Focusing on the communication piece reading, writing, knowing that you have to position ideas potentially in a limited amount of time. So it requires focus. So when you're also talking about like avoiding some of those distractions, social media, games, that kind of a thing, what's your advice for young learners to stay motivated, particularly if they know what the why is? So you're talking about the why earlier. If they're like,
Mhm.
cool, I know what I want to do. How do they stay motivated when that long-term goal might not necessarily have short-term payoffs and nuggets of achievement along the way? How do they stay focused and motivated?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do want to plug that I don't necessarily think social media is bad. I actually think it can help you
Hmm.
along the way. I just think you have to manage it.
Hmm.
And one of the ways that I think students can stay motivated, at least today, is there's a lot of good stuff out there. You know, if you're passionate about spaceflight like I was when I was a kid, I had to beg my mom to take me to the library, you know, and the only time you ever saw it on the news is if something terrible happened. At least in my childhood, there wasn't a whole lot of really big events that were highly publicized. So it kind of had a negative connotation to it. So nowadays, there's a lot of, I mean, you can go onto YouTube and you can see anything. You can learn about the physics behind it, the math behind it. You know, there's all these different facets. So my advice would be, if you know your why, find out everything that you can about it, research it, because there's always going to be something that you don't know. I mean, I learned something new at my job every single day. And I really think that if you can keep yourself current, and in today's world, it's very easy to do that because you've got YouTube, you've got the constant news channels, you've got Khan Academy, you've got all sorts of different ways in which you can fold resources into learning about this overall topic. And then I think the other side of it is your game plan. Like, you've got to know where this train is going. And if you fall off the tracks, it's sometimes really difficult to get back on. So if you can hit those milestones, okay, so I'm going to finish high school. Okay, then, you know, I'm going to go take these classes, or I'm going to go work in this trade, or I'm going to get my certification so I can move on to the next thing. Like, I think you have to have those short-term goals because we're human, right? And every time something, especially now, if it's not immediate, we're like, well, screw it. I don't want to wait that long. Um, and I also think it's good to be well-rounded. Yeah, I was very laser focused when I was a kid. You know, it was NASA or bust, and there was no way around that. And but I think some other things that helped me stay motivated along the way were being able to play music, being able to exercise, being able to read, being able to, I mean, like, I love dogs. Like, I'll just go and pet a dog, and I think you have to feed the rest of your interests as well when you're moving through these milestones, because yes, this is what I want to do in my life, but it's not necessarily your end all be all of who you are. And I think having those other pieces, make sure that they still are important in your life, because you can burn yourself out. If you only do one thing, you can kind of go, I don't want to do this anymore. And now what do I do? So I think it's important to also feed your other interests as you're working that game plan.
I really appreciate that notion of being involved in multiple activities as well that you're talking about, especially when you know the why of what you want to do, and to stay involved, like you're talking about with, like, playing music and being a fan of animals and that sort of thing. So when you're thinking of going through school as a young learner, how did you manage your time to achieve your goals? How can students effectively manage their time, especially with all the distractions and potential things that can pull you away?
Well, I will tell you, I never did it very well. I'll be
Mhm.
honest. I see students nowadays who, God, they're so much smarter than I was. But I think there's two sides of this. I think number one, your basic time management skills. Learn what a calendar is. Put things in a calendar. Make yourself a timeline. I do that at work nowadays. I I'm at the point in my job where I am what's called an increment lead, which means I have a crew that I track from the moment they walk into the door to the moment they leave to go launch. And so I'm with them for 2 years. And then I'm also an instructor of my particular system. I'm also working on some of the new moon landing missions. I'm also working on some of the new private astronaut missions. So I've got all these different buckets, and time management, it is a struggle because there's only so much time. And I even come to the point where I make myself a timeline, and I mimic this off of what the astronauts do. The astronauts have a timeline that they follow every day. It is down to the 5-minute increment of things that they do and when they do them. I don't get that detailed, but I do find that it helps to say, okay, from, noon to 1 o'clock, I'm talking to Sandy, and that's all I'm going to do. And then, from 2 to 3, I'm doing this task. And sometimes I shut off all the distractions. I close my email, I close my video chats, and I say, nothing is going to take me away from this task. Because I think it's important to start and finish a task. If you try to start all sorts of things, you end up doing a lot of things, but you don't do any of it well, and you don't get any of it done. So I think writing it down, giving yourself a timeline, giving yourself a time frame in which you can do things, and then executing. You can't just make the timeline and say, well, that was a great plan, but I didn't do it. I sat on my phone. So, and then the other side of that is you have to know when to say no. You can get yourself in too deep, and you can overcommit and then not be able to deliver, or you can get overwhelmed, and then you kind of get to the point where you can't even start anything because you're too distracted with all of the things. So I think sometimes, even if you really want to do it, or if somebody else really wants you to do it, be part of a team or go out or whatever it happens to be, I think sometimes you have to be protective of your time, and you have to say, no, I have to get this done. This is my priority right now. I have to get this done. So I can't do that. Or, I've got so many things going on in my life right now that, as much as I would love to be part of this group with you, I just can't do it right now. And I think people understand that. But the habit is to say yes to everything, because we're social people. Everybody, especially now, everybody is kind of craving that interaction, and it's very easy to lose sight of your goal if you get lost in the here and now.
Love that. That's so helpful. And particularly the idea of setting boundaries is really tough,
Yeah.
right? When you're
So hard for me.
So interested. Same. Yeah, it's hard to know what to say no to. So Teresa, moving to big picture stuff. Why is it important for young learners to stay curious?
I think if we lose our curiosity, then we lose our path forward. You have to keep asking questions. You have to keep trying to understand how it works and why it works and what's next. And if you stop getting curious, then you stop asking those questions. And I think those questions are always going to be there. As human beings, we are naturally, at least in my world, we are naturally drawn towards exploration. And I will tell you, there have been people that I have interacted with that could not care less about spaceflight. They're just like, they get like this glaze over their eyes when I start talking about it. And you can tell they're going, I have no idea what this lady's talking about, and I really don't care, or there's the other ones that's like, oh, that's so cool, So, and I think we have to have that curiosity in order to really grasp at what is next. What is the next step after low Earth orbit? What's the next step after we go to the moon? Where is this going to go, and what is the benefit going to be? I think a lot of people want to see it come back to us. And honestly, to keep your curiosity, and this was exceptionally true for me as a child, I would say go to the Cosmosphere, right? that's where it started for me, is have those experiences. And I think the Cosmosphere is a fantastic place for that to happen, because They tell the spaceflight story better than anybody else. I've been to a lot of the space museums. The Cosmosphere is where it's at. And I hear there's renovations. I'm very excited about this. And I would like a personal invitation to the grand opening. I just want to plug that. Yes. Because I will tell you, the German gallery is one of my favorite spots in all the museum. Okay. So anyway, I would say that go have those experiences, go see a shuttle launch, or well, shuttle's not flying anymore. Go see a launch, go see the shuttles that are on display, and really go, because I think if the last 2 years have taught us anything, it's that there is just nothing that's going to replace that ability to be there in person. And that's what the astronauts say when they come back too. They say, you guys see all these pictures here and you train us well, but there is just nothing like being there. And if we don't keep that curiosity and we don't keep asking those questions, then we never get to get there in person. And I tell you what, someday I want to get there in person. I want to see the Earth from, 250 miles up and see what it looks like with my own eyes. And then that spurs new questions, which spurs new growth, I think.
Well, we love that. And if it's okay with you, when you do go to space, we will interview you again, and then we'll mash both of these interviews together about Teresa talking about going to space and then Teresa having gone to space. So
yeah, I will tell you, I will have to be highly sedated, at least on the way up and on the way down, because I will be terrified. I mean, I don't even like to fly on airplanes that much.
That is so ironic. Can I just say how ironic that is?
It's so weird. I think it's a control thing. Like if I was in the cockpit, I think I'd be totally fine. Be like, what's that? What's that? How does this talk about curiosity? Like, what's our altitude? What's our airspeed? But they kind of frown upon that whole, passengers.
Yeah, lately. Yeah.
No, yeah. I just don't like to be up in 14D, not knowing what's going on. So maybe if I can be, reading all the displays in the rocket, it'll be okay. But
good window seat.
90-year-old William Shatner can do it.
That's right. Well,
and I'm just saying Patrick Stewart is next. I'm calling it right now. Patrick Stewart is going to go. He has to.
He is next. They're going to sequentially go through every Star Trek captain season by season and iteration by iteration. Right? So that's exactly it. Yep. He'll need to be. And then Chris Pine's going to be in line.
Mm-hmm. Tom Cruise is in line too, but I don't really care that much about that one.
That's fair. So, just to quickly double down on the notion about the Cosmosphere and like what an important educational institution it is, how absolutely fundamental it is to so many people's development, particularly as young learners in space and science and STEM education. And for both of us speaking as alums like Mimi, it's so transformational for so many people. This is something we hear over and over in these conversations. And as we're talking about finding, places for folks who have a variety of passions in space exploration. So we chatted earlier, Teresa, and you shared a great story about somebody telling you, if you have a passion for something, follow that, and there will be a place for you at NASA and in space exploration. So I wondering if you could share that story with us and sort of how that came to be and what you remember from that.
Sure, it's one of my favorite stories. So when I was a kid, I wanted to go to space camp, and I begged and begged and begged, and we finally, through a very interesting path, we made it to the Cosmosphere. And honestly, if I have one regret about living in Texas, probably other than the fact that it's like summer all the time, would be that I don't live close enough for my kids to be able to go to the Cosmosphere all the time. That probably would be my biggest sad face. But that's okay. I drag them when we drive back to Nebraska, and everybody in the car hates me for like a good 4 hours, but that's okay. Anyway, so I was a young undergraduate at the University of Nebraska, and Clay Anderson was Nebraska's very first and still only astronaut from my state. And I was working at the planetarium at the time, and we were doing a Space Days festival kind of thing. And it was my job to follow the astronaut guy around and make sure he had everything that he needed. And of course I was like, this is the best day and the best job ever. So I remember, and he was an astronaut candidate at the time, so he hadn't even flown in space yet. But we just instantly connected. Clay, to this day, is still a very good friend of mine, and I know he is also a very big supporter of the Cosmosphere. And so I kept trying to figure out where my path was going to be. I had spent a year studying engineering, and it just wasn't my thing. I just could not get into it. I did not want to be somebody who sat in a desk and did CAD programs for the rest of my life. That may be great for other people, but for me, it was not the path for me. And so I was a little kind of like desperate of like, what am I going to do? And I had found I really loved science. I really loved geology. And so I had switched my major, but I was like, how am I going to get to NASA, with a geology degree? And there's many paths. But I really had my heart set on Johnson Space Center because as a kid with the Cosmosphere groups, I had come down and seen JSC with my own eyes, talk about experiences and really seen how mission operations go. And I was like, this is where I want to be. So I remember it very clearly. We were walking up the stairs and I'm, it's so cliche, but he's walking like super fast, like an astronaut does. And I'm running after him, so excited just to be in his presence. And I remember asking him, okay, so what do I need to do to get to NASA? And at that moment, he stopped, like dead in his tracks, like he was walking up the stairs and he just stopped. And he turned and he looked at me and he said, don't go do something just because you think it's going to get you to NASA. That's not the way to go. What you need to do is you need to go find something that you love and do that better than anybody else. And there will be a place for you at NASA. And that has just stuck with me to this day. Actually, I just looked at it yesterday. Clay, at that moment, he gave me a little keychain. It's just this little plastic astronaut. It is not even he probably bought it for like 99 cents, but he gave it to me and he said, someday you'll come work with me at NASA and, you can have your keychain. I still have it in my car. That was 20 years ago, but I still have it. And I remember that sometimes when I'm frustrated or things are a little overwhelming or they're confusing, spaceflight is very interesting right now. So there's a lot going on. And so sometimes I just have to stop and I have to think about where my passion is, because I found where my passion was for me, and the Cosmosphere helped cultivate this too. I was very interested in working at the Cosmosphere when I was in college, and I found through working the astronaut training programs there that I had a natural knack for teaching and instructing, and I just loved it. It was like my two loves came together. It was spaceflight and teaching, and they just molded into this beautiful thing that I didn't even know that I liked, and there it was. And I found I was pretty good at that. And so sometimes you forget that when there's red tape or, some of the things that happen in the government world. And so every now and then I have to stop and remember that I found what I was good at, and I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it the best of my abilities. And there's a place for me. And I think that's very important for young people to realize. You don't have to be an engineer. You don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be an astronaut to come and be part of America's space program.
So I want to move to some leadership lessons. And so as we move from young learners to business professionals, and I know we have like about 15 or so minutes. We want to be respectful of your time. So you might collapse or combine a couple of these questions into one.
Okay.
But I suppose like building on something you were talking about earlier, like a few questions down addresses the idea of early stage preparation for launches. So you were talking about, the fact that you're working typically 2 years ahead of a scheduled launch for not only moon landing missions, private astronaut missions. Was curious, like, why so early, and why is that early stage preparation so critical in space exploration?
Well, a lot of it revolves around their training schedules. A lot of crew members tell me that training is actually more difficult than being in space, because with training, you're traveling and then your family is still around and you're kind of splitting your time between different countries, different systems, different environments, and it's all kind of being thrown at you at once. So our curriculum is, and that's one of the reasons that I feel like this place is home for me, is that you can have a lot of really, really intelligent people who cannot portray or who cannot teach a class well. So NASA really likes to have folks who are instructors first, and then maybe system experts second. Because a lot of that stuff with the system, you can learn it, but there's just something about folks being able to instruct a lesson that other folks don't have. So, but because we are instructors first, we are able to design our curriculum. And a lot of people think, you just go to school and you learn something randomly, and then, you go to a different class and you learn something else. But really, there's a lot of design behind pedagogy, and there's a lot of very well thought out plans that go into, any kind of curriculum. So our curriculum is designed that it gets more advanced as we move forward, but we also give them some time just to forget. There's a lot of times they'll come back and they say, I know I had this class a year ago, I don't remember any of it. So you kind of have to mold them and start over. And as you get the juices flowing, they start to remember things. But there's a lot of systems that they have to learn. There's a lot of things that are very critical. Like going out on a spacewalk is the most dangerous thing we do outside of launch and landing. So there's not a lot of room for error in doing those kinds of operations. So you have to do a job well done. And I think sometimes that's kind of forgotten, that, there is, of course, opportunity for things for mistakes to be made and for us to learn from those mistakes. But there are some times when you really have to do the job at a very high level. And astronauts are always functioning at that level. So I think you have to be able to really perform high a lot of the times. And then that allows the crew members to seep through their multiple months of training. It just kind of goes in, if they go, okay, I had a good instructor and she taught me things really well, and now I can't remember it all, but I'm going to go back and I'm going to see her again. And it allows them a chance to really have it just marinate and become part of their response. Because that's our hope, is that when you train, when you go back up there, it's not something brand new that you've never seen before. So, and we just hope to help them get it right. And then, of course, we have ground support to ease that burden if they forget.
So building on that, the idea of, you mentioned that spacewalks are the most dangerous activity, or potentially risky activity, next to launch and landing. Is your job as somebody who creates safe environments for astronauts to keep them safe, and then you're also working with folks when they're in space and training them to interact with that team on the ground that's going to support them. How do you help them create safe environments? How do you help them manage risk and potential risk-based situations that they might go into? And then what room do you have for plans to change within that? So really appreciate the note on the curriculum and giving them time to forget. So how do you enable them to plan to react and to be agile and to expect the unexpected?
Yeah, and that's really important, because as much as you train, there's always going to be some sort of weird thing that may turn up. So we have these things called flight rules. And so flight rules are basically like standard operating procedures. They're just rules that we have put in place when everybody is calm and everybody's got their heads on straight and there's no emergency. That's the time to plan for an emergency. It's when there's not one. And we talk through things, and there are folks who own the flight rules. So like, for example, my group owns the safe atmosphere and the toxic atmosphere flight rules. So we have to keep up with what's going on board, because I'm not flying in space anytime soon. So I have to know what they're doing on board and if that's going to affect any of our flight rules. And then the other thing is you've got to follow the flight rules. You can't have rules in place and then when emergency strikes, you just throw them out the window. And that was something that Chris Kraft, who he recently passed away, the Mission Control Center is named after him. And that was his biggest thing was we make these rules for a reason and we follow them. And unless, something significant forces us to change it, and it has to be a multiple incident to where you don't just change a flight rule because a crew member doesn't like it and they complained about it. So you build your procedures off of your flight rules. And when you do that, it allows everybody to be on the same page and know exactly what is coming next. Even if you're in a situation that you didn't anticipate, you at least, the ground and the crew have an idea of how this is going to go. We try to plan for every emergency. Sometimes all the instructors get in a room, and we're like little kids who've been given kind of free reign to be like, okay, break whatever it is you guys want to break, but we're going to see how they react, and then we're going to help them fix it. So by training those emergencies, they get used to the unknown. They get used to how things are going to be shaken up on board and what they think is happening, and then it may take a turn and go somewhere else. And as an instructor, that's really fun because I can sit in a room and I can go, okay, what do I throw at them now? But I think it's important to have those plans and procedures. And then when you train it, then you train it so that we have a saying at NASA, it's you train like you fly and you fly like you train. It's you want to be as close on both ends of it as you possibly can. And I don't have me personally, I don't have a say in if I wanted to go change a flight rule, I could bring that forward and we have a committee. It's kind of a meeting of the minds, and you have to have it approved by the flight director office. There's a lot of minds that go into making sure that we are thinking broad enough and we're thinking in what is a realistic response to some of the emergencies. So that's kind of how the process goes. As far as keeping the astronauts safe, the best thing we can do is educate them on what the risks are. And it's not, even though it's routine, there are some very significant risks to flying and living in space. It's inherent. You can't go to space without incurring some risk. You can't drive a car without incurring some risk either. But the best thing we can do is we can educate them about the risks. We can train them what the risks are, and then we mitigate those risks or we don't do it. And if we say we're not going to do it, then we follow that rule. If we mitigate the risks, then we follow the procedures of risk mitigation. And at the end of the day, you do have to accept that there are some risks that we maybe are not going to be able to anticipate, or there are some situations that get out of control very quickly. And that is an acceptance on the part of the NASA space program, is that there's some things that could go bad, but we do the best we can. We educate, we train, and we mitigate that risk. Did I answer your question?
You did. Yeah, thank you. You talked about mitigating the risk of emergencies in space, keeping astronauts safe, what the interplay is like between space and folks on the ground, what some of the criteria is like when flight rules will change. Appreciate all that. And I think in the final few minutes, and we want to be respectful of your time, if we could go big picture around leadership. So you've worked with a lot of folks in leadership positions. You've been in leadership positions. What are the characteristics in your mind of an ideal leader, and how do you see that incorporated in your day-to-day work?
NASA is a great place to really witness leadership. It happens in all shapes and sizes, and it's really a good place. I think one thing we do very well at NASA is we show and we mimic leadership. And so for me personally, I think a good leader, first and foremost, I think a good leader they have to be knowledgeable about what they're doing, and they have to be able to say, I don't know. That as an instructor, that is day one, rule one, learn to say, I don't know. Because the temptation is to either make something up or tell a partial truth, or fumble around with a whole bunch of word vomit that doesn't really answer the question. And the astronauts will eat you alive if you do that. So I think a good leader has to say, look, guys, I don't know. I don't know the answer to this. Is there anybody here who knows the answer? Really use the resources of your team. There might be people in your group that, live and breathe some of this stuff, and pull them in, and really just be able to say, I need to go figure this out, and I'm going to get back to you guys. But so that, to me, that's a big one, being able to say, I don't know. Another one is knowing and understanding the members of your team. It's hard. NASA is a difficult place at times to be a leader, because you've got very highly motivated, well-educated, really smart, really articulate people who are not shy about asking a whole bunch of questions. So, if you don't like coming and trying to justify your rationale, NASA's not the place for you. But, and you've got to pull those people in. You've got to be able to use their skills and understand where their skills are and what drives them and what's going to upset them and what is going to be the best dynamic for the team. And sometimes those are hard decisions and they're hard conversations. And I think a leader has to be able to have those conversations. And I think mentoring is a huge thing. There's a lot of times where leaders tend to be like these faraway movie stars that you can't really interact with, and you can't, really have a good conversation with. And I think mentoring as a leader, finding somebody to mentor and bringing them up is the way to do it. I mean, we did that at the Cosmosphere. When I was a camp counselor, the counselors before me, I was fortunate enough when I was at the Cos, Patty Carey was still alive. So we actually got to meet and interact with her. But she passed away shortly after, I think it was my second year there. So the counselors after me never had the opportunity to meet her. And so I think you have to carry that story on so that no matter if it's called Astrolab or it's called Fat P, like you and I remember it, Sandy, that story is carried on, and the folks that are coming up behind you are just as well prepared and just as passionate as you were when you were that age. So I think that's really important. You have to be able to pass that baton. And as much as I really wish I'd quit my job tomorrow and come work at the Cosmosphere, I think the baton is passed, and that's how we carry forward. And that, back to the curiosity thing, that's how we bring in the next generation to come and be curious. And NASA's got a lot of stuff on our plate. We need really smart people to solve really big problems. And I think that we have leaders that are willing to mentor those folks coming in and carry that story forward. I have so many other things to say about leaders, but
that is awesome. Well, I have another question. Can I pop in, Sandy?
Absolutely, of course.
When you were talking about the simulations you do.
Are you gonna offer me a job?
Yes, I do. Dang it, you can have my job. Come back.
Kill me.
Yeah, we could find a place for him that it's bigger than it looks. Okay, so the simulations, and you see people responding in a faux crisis, but it feels like a crisis to them. What qualities do you see manifest in the people who are most successful facing a crisis?
Well, I think the first thing is you've got to find a way to ratchet up the logical side of your brain and ratchet down the emotional side of your brain. People always say, don't panic. You can panic, but you're just going to have to panic and be able to think at the same time. And I think, for me personally, when there's a whole lot going on, there's lots of distractions. I need a minute. I need everybody to be quiet, and I need a minute. And you can take a minute in an emergency. It maybe not a full minute, but you can take a second and go, okay, what's the situation? What are the major risks involved here? What is the major things that are at risk for either a life or a science experiment or the vehicle or whatever it happens to be? And what have I been trained? And what's my next step? at NASA, they call it warn, gather, work, which means you warn everybody, everybody comes together and formulates a plan, and then you go execute that plan. And I think the people that I see that are most successful in emergent situations are the ones who can get their heads straight and say, okay, this is the problem. These are our options. And this is the way that we're going to execute. And you can trip up at any one of those spots. You know, you could see maybe there's multiple problems, or maybe you just can't figure out which direction to go, or maybe everybody starts arguing because everybody wants to be in charge. There's lots of ways that it can go awry. But I think the big thing you have to remember is you're not in this alone. Like, it is a team environment, and you don't have to be right all the time. You don't have to be the leader all the time. You just have to figure out, what is the problem? What are our options? And what are we going to do about it? And I think when I teach my classes, I tell my crew, I want you to go away with 3 things. And I don't pick a whole litany of things that they're going to remember, because I'm not going to see them for a year and they won't remember. So, you know, you pick the big takeaways. And that's what we do in training as well, is we want an emergency to be executed quickly and efficiently. And we want them to be confident in their decisions. But we also want them to work together. They have to figure out, because they're up there together, right? You ain't going home by yourself. Nobody goes home solo. So that you're going to have to figure out how that dynamic works. And people who can see that big picture and not get lost in the details of the emergency, if they can step back and say, okay, we got this, those are the ones that are most successful, in my opinion.
A great question and discussion.
Yeah.
I love the notion of nobody goes home solo. That's the only instance when you're on a job when you can't go home solo. Any other gig, you can fly home on your own, or you can take the bus. Literally the only thing is when you're in space, right?
Right. Like, you can't say, I'm going to go for a walk and come back.
No, none of that. And, you know, and you're in it to win it. And there's everybody is goal oriented, but the idea that you're going to take care of each other, and we're going to go up together and we're going to come back down together, because for the families, I mean, it is a huge burden on the families. People forget about that. It's not the family's dream. You know, either the families were either their parents, or, you know, they gave birth to a child who wants to go do all this crazy stuff, or they're the spouse, they married into it, or they're the children who were born into it. And it's not their dream. Sometimes they're like, I didn't sign up for this. You know, they're the only ones who really didn't sign up for it. And one of the things that the crew members that help the families through it is they go up together, they're going to take care of each other, and they're all going to come home together. That's the deal. So
love that. Love the notion of them taking care of each other and the warn, gather, work. And oh my gosh, maybe there's so many nuggets in here, which I'm going to be thinking about. Right? Teresa, thanks so much for your time. I know we're a couple minutes over.
That's okay.